IVM.
Welcome to Audiogyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
Arthur G. Doughty, a Dominion activist, once said, "Of all our national assets, archives are the most precious. They are the gift of one generation to another, and the extent of our care of them marks the extent of our civilization." Today I have Ruturaj Parikh with us on Audiogyan. Ruturaj is an architect and a partner at Matter, an architecture, design and content firm based in Goa. He has been involved in architecture, urban design, planning, curatorial and social projects. Ruturaj regularly writes about contemporary works and ideas on architecture relevant to India and its subcontinent. I stumbled upon him when I visited an architecture conference called Frame Conclave this year, actually 2019. Ruturaj designs and writes from Goa. So, thank you Ruturaj for giving your time, and it's a real honor to have you on Audiogyan.
Thanks Kedar.
So I've kept the name as the topic of today as Think Matter with Ruturaj, and it's mainly to understand your thought process behind archiving, and also to understand what Matter does and how is it helping fellow designers, fellow architects, and also the younger generation.
Sure.
So to set the context, if you can start by just telling us what is Matter and like bunch of other things which you're doing under it. Mainly the studio matter part of it, and also the think matter part of it, and also some bits of the merit list, the short list, and other things. I mean, this is just to set the context, and then we'll deep dive into archiving as a concept.
Sure. So when we set up Matter in 2014, it was more of a reaction to what we had witnessed closely in the discipline of design publishing across India. So we did not want to create this commercially driven behemoth. We, like your podcast, we realized that smaller individual driven efforts of production, of publishing are in the longer run more effective than this sort of large, out of control kind of commercial establishment. So that's where Matter originated. And initially it wasn't a design practice. It was only a publishing practice, and slowly, as we started getting more work, I got more and more interested in doing architecture as well. So the architecture, design and publishing, the three sort of core parts of Matter, the architecture part sort of followed the publishing part. Books were always our first love, and architecture books more so. But as we started working on Think Matter, the portal, we realized that the landscape of critical thinking about architecture in India is fairly absent, and very few people in silos are trying to do something. We also do not have a culture traditionally in India of critical analysis, review, critical analysis. We don't have a culture of criticism in design in India. So that's what we wanted to kind of address. And in our own way, we wanted to create a world in which we could also reflect on what's happening in and around us. So that's where Matter began. And as we started taking up more design work, our publishing practice grew. But it was founded in these 3 to 4 critical ideas. The first was we wanted a open, accessible, free online resource, especially for students. So Think Matter was that. We wanted to create a responsible, sharp, critical review of projects in India, not another award. And that's how the merit list was born. We also wanted to create a very good, high quality professional journal. And Inside is that. Inside has also slowly moved into the digital realm, but still it is a biannual journal. And lastly, with the Frame Conclave, we wanted to close this loop and create a biennale kind of an event where we can bring together like-minded people, let's say, to have a dialogue on concerns of contemporary architecture in India. So the first one, which discussed modern heritage, looked at the history of architecture in India, especially post-independence history of architecture in India, and we kind of want to also create Frame as a platform for people to have difficult discussions, not just discussions where everybody presents their work and pats each other's backs, but more which kind of have a greater churning and greater confrontational. We must have more platforms in India which can confront the difficult questions that are posed to our profession in general. So that's what Frame hopefully will become. So that's pretty much our universe. Apart from many small initiatives in publication, in curatorial initiatives that we are involved in, these are kind of our 4 critical ideas that we are working on as matter. And as a design practice, it's an architectural practice, but because unfortunately, since we were in publishing first, and then so it is all the more difficult for us to create, to match our own benchmarks, ideas. I mean, the standards that we judge the world by, let's say, as a curatorial practice, we would hope that our work also matches those standards, which is what the big conundrum is right now, which is the difficult part. But yeah, that's the background for matter.
And obviously there are a lot more questions which can be asked on practices and the kind of work you're doing. But this conversation I wanted to generally focus more on archiving, because that's the first line which you see, and which is also what I'm trying to do through Audiogyan, is archiving thoughts and archiving or documenting some of the important people, right? So why do you think archiving or documentation is important or required, especially in independent India?
See, when CEPT set up its archives, let me take it a little behind. When I was sort of moving out of a role at Indian Architect and Builder, Charles Correa was at that time putting together his archive. These drawings were supposed to go to RIBA, and it was quite unfortunate because Correa's entire over and his entire thinking and his foundational sort of ideas are all here, very much. Unfortunately, the hard copies are somewhere in RIBA. But there is a reason for that. We do not have a culture of preserving really anything. Now, a lot gets preserved by chance because we are also a civilization that produces a lot of culture. But especially in architecture, since a lot of formal practices were set up after independence, we do not till CEPT kind of put a sort of put an agenda around the CEPT archives. JJ was the only place, and Doshie's office, Vastushilp, which had some way of cataloging and archiving. There must be other places, but they were not. They were kind of out of public view. So if an architect like Correa has to put all his work somewhere, there is really nothing. Now,
but sorry to interrupt, but these practices were individual proactive efforts or mainly driven by, say, Nehru or these kind of people?
Which practices he refers to?
The archiving as a concept. Like, for example...
if you think about Nehru himself, he was very interested in this idea. He did set up the National Archives. He was instrumental in approving, pushing funding for the academies so that they can create their own libraries and all. The entire interest in science and all came from him. But somehow architecture, and especially post-independence practices in architecture, the iconic ones, were fairly... I mean, we are culturally different, I can imagine a Swiss studio or a French studio kind of, treating every tracing that they produce with gloves and putting them in nicely catalogued boxes.
Temperature controlled.
Temperature controlled boxes. We don't have that culture. We throw sheets on the ground. So we don't even, a lot of these practices Mrs. Somaya, Brinda Somaya, tried a lot to archive Pravina Mehta's and Hema Sankalya's work. Very difficult task, because when they also shut down their practice, Korea at least had RIBA where the things can go, but these practices nowhere. I mean, Kamu Iyer also, a lot of these old practices, they don't have anywhere to send this work. Now CEPT is there; they are trying to put together a better version of, let's say, a professional archive. But for us, more than the physical stuff, it was the ideas which were important. The physical stuff, we would love to do it at some point, but right now we don't have either the space or the bandwidth or the budget to do it. So what we wanted to do with Matter is to take a thin slice through time and observe the cross-section through what are the prevalent ideas, what are the ideas in the forefront of our profession right now. Who are these people who are in this moment being able to frame those ideas? So there are many good practices we thought will influence, the next generation, the generation to come. What happens to their ideas? Now, of course, we are in an extremely other, we are now in a place which is completely on the other extreme, where there's a strange kind of this media boom, but most of it is fairly touching the surface. It's all superficial, and so our thought process was that if we as Matter not only create good content and on contemporary architecture in India ourselves, but also create this little network with people like you, or like Rajesh who does Architecture Live, or Geeta and Bridge who do Landscape Journal, to create this little sort of ecosystem of people who are genuinely interested in content on architecture in India, and also genuinely interested in the ideas, that emergent ideas of our time. So our effort with Matter was twofold. One is to create and archive this original content, put it in the public domain, make it as accessible as possible. So we have never really thought about monetizing and all that. We had tough time to actually fund a lot of models that we were thinking of. Luckily, we had patronage from some organizations like Takshila and H.N.R. Johnson and all. But mostly, these efforts were self-funded initially. And this was the story with all good content initiatives across. No Condé Nast is going to write me a check any day. So in that case, I found other people like you who on their own steam create very good content, and our active effort was also to try and reach out to them to kind of have some sort of cross-pollination collaboration with people like that. So the archiving idea slowly has now grown into this, let's say, this repository of contemporary ideas on architecture in India. So I want Matter to act as a repository of sorts. Let's say 100 episode of your podcast, 1,000 good buildings through merit list, about 2,000 good lectures over 6 years, stuff like that. So putting together this packet, which, because now we have a great access to digital media, can be easily disseminated across the world, will probably be some kind of what we said in the introduction, some kind of legacy of sorts, I think. And now we are at a critical time, because the sort of confusing initial times after after the 90s and the liberalization and the money coming in and the big farmhouses, that's gone.
That's gone, yeah.
Yeah, that's
we
gone.
are started to find that voice now.
Yes,
maybe, yeah.
Yes, that, and also the noise is sort of the din is it's either very high in decibel, so that's it takes its own course, or it's died down. So what we are seeing now is that these younger practices which are emerging, who are located in this idea of trying to find meaningful work in India and trying to understand what our landscape is about, what our people are about, the economics and the social capital that we have in India, and the incredible wealth of skills and knowledge that we have around. So we are now getting more and more interested in this generation, which is kind of post-liberalization generation, who have seen this madness of having access to capital, but kind of are trying to slow things down and locate themselves more firmly on the ground. Hopefully, in another 5 to 6 years, we will have a good enough knowledge base or data to then start making critical observations of this time. So that's the whole agenda in some way.
To add to that, I'd given one talk at Pune Design Festival, and I started off with the slide, which was actually a screenshot of the series called Abstract on Netflix. And there Paula Shah was just showing her drawings, and there was almost like a big gallery of just stacked boxes. And I was surprised to know it's all her life's work. Right? So that's where I started. Look at Paula Shah, one of the important graphic designers of our time, and look at the content of archived work she has done.
And there's a greater interest, from coming from abroad. But that interest is, I wouldn't put too much sort of emphasis on it, because that's more sort of this fascination to the exotic new land that everybody has found, and then all the big museums are going to. That's not really, but just to have to ascribe some value to our own culture of architecture in India, and that we somehow don't have. We keep celebrating people like Korea, and of course there are reasons for that. But people like Kamu Iyer, so essential to the city, so such brilliant, practice, years of work, consistent, good quality, grounded work. Now, what happens to the work of somebody like Kamu Iyer, or what happens to his ideas? And that, I think, so this secondary layer, or this kind of generation which Brinda Somay calls the bridge generation, which spans the masters to the post-liberalization practices. Even for them, people like CNT, Prem Chandavarkar's practice, there is a immense value in evaluating how much culturally they have produced in the silent times, the times of emergency, the times of the dark times before the 90s. Not socially, difficult, economically impossible times. And they were able to produce quality work silently, without any great, without propaganda about it. Hardly any awards then, hardly one or two magazines kind of reporting from some bunker somewhere, maybe A+D was there, INB was around. I imagine there was a nice, beautiful magazine called, so Ram Rahman's house has these boxes of mid, about 80s, 70s and 80s, early 90s design magazines. And there's one which was just title design. And
he showed few of them at the conclave.
He did. Brilliant stuff. And so these things are there, I mean, very much. When they did the state of architecture, there's this vitrine of this select books. But you can also look at how little was produced as content, in that time. So even that's an interesting time, which we kind of skipped. We went from Korea, Doughty, Rewal, Kanvinde. Even Kanvinde's work, I mean, what a Herculean task that Tanuja and Sanjay have done to put together in that book. It's simply going to be lost, and now you are seeing these monographs coming out. People like Hasmukh Patel, people like, fantastic. What a book that thing is. And there's another one, which is Anant Raj's book, the one that Shubhra has done. And then when you look at this work and you think that, where the hell were these drawings, all this time? And that kind of creates this big question, that we have to really, and we are losing time in that. We have to kind of reconcile the 20, 25 years that have passed between the, let's say, 60s and the 90s, where there were other practices. There were, of course, the celebrated practices doing their work, but there were a lot of other practices. There was great work being produced in Bangalore, in Chennai, very silently and in very, very frugal, very extremely dignified way. Which is also something that now we are getting more and more. That was the reflection from Frame, I think. More so, yeah.
So I may be wrong, but we have celebrated say Hampi's architecture, Khajuraho's and
Yeah.
Taj Mahal, and then directly we have now into I don't know whether I should use, but yeah, directly Lodhas and Hiranandani's. But
Correct.
we have that in between period also, which needs to be reflected.
And which is
upon.
actually a period of a great amount of critical thought on what is appropriate for a country like ours, because now everything has kind of moved in private domain. If you see magazines, what they publish now, airports and farmhouses and some chic corner of some restaurant somewhere, so all of it is kind of privately funded, privately sort of private and controlled domains. Even the land on which it's basically everything behind the walls,
and also monotonous, because I just recently been to Jaipur and I could see some of the buildings which were really new, but they tried to maintain the old style. So I don't know where these are coming from.
This is cartoonish versions of so it's that is something else. I mean, that is all confusing. But even the good stuff. I mean, how many people are? Imagine the Jawahar Kala Kendra, for example, or imagine the the Asian Games Village, or any good building. Bangalore,
Kala Kendra in Goa,
the Kala Academy in Goa. All these buildings were public buildings. They were accessible. Even the campuses of the IIMs were fairly public. They were easy to access. And even CEPT has built those walls around them now, and now you need an access card to go in. So fundamentally, everything has moved into the private domain, and more so in the last 10 years.
So I did one in the 100th episode I did with Balkrishna Doshi.
I was listening to it today.
And they have become now more exclusive than the inclusive overall philosophy also.
And that's the problem with really everything. So somehow these models of this podcasting or what we are also trying to do, we want to make it more public, more accessible. And that is the only way we can kind of have a strong argument against the bizarre madness of what's happening even in the media landscape. I mean, look at the trade shows and all that. They're vulgar to me. I mean, it's just impossible to imagine in a country like ours we can throw that much money towards something which could just it just doesn't make sense to us. So in that way also, I think our effort is to also keep things which are more grounded, and to talk to people who think in our way, which is the part which is rather difficult.
In fact, I've been struggling, and I'm not like a subject expert, but after Doshi sir's interview, wherever I go and I see like a light in the day, I generally reflect back, why is it? Why can't we have like just daylight, just the sunlight? Right? Because
too much to ask.
Yeah, his office in Sangat was just, he's sitting there and he's saying, today I can tell you where the sun is exactly, even though there's concrete on our top. So it was so beautiful. And then these are small elements which keep adding, and then sensitive people to think and reflect back.
We are just we've been reduced to some kind of auditors of floor space in the last 10 years. That's the pity.
So going back to one of the points which you mentioned, which you're trying to take a thin slice of what where the cross section is, and then trying to make sense out of it or reconcile certain things. So on that note, I wanted to understand, again, as a layman and not as a subject expert, I see 2 or 3 moments which I have consumed so far. So there was a Baha'us movement which probably somehow translated into the Chandigarh project. Then I know one more which is the minimalism type movement, right? So are there any such instances which you have found out there were like clearly big milestones in way architecture was built, and then with those few examples, if you can tell us that how do you then decide what to archive? Right?
Okay.
Because there's so much noise, and as you mentioned, the noise which is above the decibel level is obviously not in the radar itself, right? So it's out. So within the radar, you have still noise and the signal. So how do you decide that this is a signal which needs to be archived?
Yeah, no, that's a very tough call. So the problem right now is that we are kind of on the other end of the very confusing 15 years that we saw after the economic after really the capital came in rushing, generally there is a lot of confusion. Okay, so the movements and the styles were also a reflection of the larger societal agenda. I feel, the Bauhaus movement, for example, was in some way rooted in this idea that industrial production will answer the needs for the future, or mass production in some way. So the idea of simplicity and frugality and cleanliness and things like that. Well, at some point we realized that one of the difficult and overarching agendas is to build appropriately. So I won't use the word sustainability because it's kind of thrown around.
That was another
that's
word which
thrown
is
around a lot, and there are all sorts of grey areas in the way people practice this thing they call sustainability, but in some way eco-friendly and there are a lot of fundamental questions there which have remained unanswered in the last 15 years. Nonetheless, and there are many practices genuinely founded in this idea. The idea is not a vertical. It's not like I can create a practice. I mean, this is my thought. This is an observation from recent years. Is that you cannot really create a practice around sustainability. It can't say that every building I design is going to be sustainable, and there is a way of doing it. No, I don't think so. I mean, that's if somebody is claiming that, you have to re-examine the claim. Nonetheless, there is in silos a genuine attempt to find what is appropriate, and this attempt to find what is appropriate, not just for the poor, not just for the sake of the world, or not just for the charity of it. It is also what is appropriate as a consumptive practice, because design was always consumed as well. I mean, you can see, look at Kanchenjunga. They are, high-end condos, but look at what it does. It does not. It's kind of built right next to, fortunately or unfortunately, Ambani's house. So you have a direct comparison for a city of what the architecture at some point aspired to do, even for the rich, and what the rich do now. Look at the ugly expression of that, that pointless capital that floats around. So, and that's a single family home. We have to keep reminding ourselves. So, in that sense, if you understand that. There is at all levels, in all kinds of programmatic situations, there is a genuine search for what could be appropriate and what could be termed as an appropriate response, especially for a country like ours in this time, where no matter what you say, there are children dying hungry every day. So then it just. But we have started to realize this overreaching sustainability agenda is kind of, people have moved on from there, and there are certain practices in a very pragmatic, research-oriented, genuine way are looking at appropriate models, both of practice and of building, and by terming this word, by kind of emphasizing on this word appropriate. I also mean that these practices designed for the rich. It's not that you can't build an exclusive thing and not think, because at every age we need to create these sort of ecstatic examples of architecture. That's what keeps us going, really. And so we cannot always negate that in the interest of the greater good. Nonetheless, there are large questions in that, so if you look at the practice of somebody like Bijoy Jain, who has been, which is a contemporary practice, let's say one of the very known ones internationally, apart from that architecture being very exclusive in its own sense, but there are also very critical questions there. So recently he designed one one studio in Uttarakhand. And if you actually look at the architecture of that studio, you realize the agenda that goes beyond the practice. So I'm not saying that's sustainable or that's appropriate, but I'm just saying
the one
that
with the roof,
the stone roofs, which it kind of hugs the site.
It's in the merit list, right?
Also, I think one of our learnings from, since you mentioned merit list, is from this reiterative juries of the merit list, is that almost all the projects that have been selected by the jury, many of them are in private domain. Many of them are expensive projects, great detailing, beautiful use of material. But the big question was that what across all juries is that what is the challenge of the project? And I think that, so if you look at the landscape of contemporary architecture in India currently, the signal to us is that the few practices are reacting to this idea of, one, what is an appropriate way of doing a practice and of building in India, and two, what are the new tools to do that? So we are not just romanticizing mud, because I mean it clearly has limitations. You can't really move on. So you have to move on from that kind of visual, romantic idea of what is appropriate to really what is. So if I'm kind of trying to do a very expensive, let's say, real estate in Bandra Kurla complex, how do I then apply any of it? So I end up creating a niche for myself, great, but of hardly any impact, because the BKC is still to be built. So in some way, we are also looking at the practice who can mainstream ideas. And I think, and that's the signal I have right now. So there are certain people in our view whom we keep going to, whom we cover extensively in our work as the journal, whom we would like to sort of have longer drawn conversations in greater depth with, are the people who are able to articulate this question of what's going to be appropriate to as an architecture of India in, let's say, the next two decades to come.
Okay. One example is obviously Sameep Padora's library, right? So it has that romantic, old traditional nomenclature of being sustainable, but it's still completely.
It's quite avant-garde. I mean, it's quite contemporary. It's a great example, and his practice is a good example also, because it's rooted in research in some way, but it's not kind of research of that academic type. It's an applied research of sorts. So it has agility. So he can deploy his ideas very quickly. Some work, some don't, and we also know what don't, and everything can be kind of analyzed. And his work is also out there. It's accessible by everyone. He is accessible as a person, but his work is also accessible. I mean, it's accessible to students because the ideas are not, kind of coated in this layers of intention. He just does it, and then when it's out there, it's visible. So that's a good example of a practice.
Correct.
Like that.
So I mean, so to summarize, what I understand is, like, being a curator or being at least a medium, you need to strongly reflect back on the thoughts and processes and ideologies of some legends, and then not people who are practicing today, not really mimicking that thought for the sake of it, but really understanding the thought process and then making it appropriate,
very
and
important.
then building.
You have to find a continuity of sorts.
Correct.
In a way that you don't make a caricature version of history, but you also don't completely dissociate from it. That's the problem of what we have right now.
The closest example, I also do sometimes musicians ka interview. The closest example is Phula Deshpande, and he said that if you go and ask, say, Bal Gandharva ki, how do you decompose this rag and what is this based on, then he would say, I don't understand, I just sing. So that comes naturally. And then, but it's a study material for us. In fact, just 2 days before I did, like, Kabir never knew grammar, but his words were profound, right?
Correct.
So now we are doing PhD on Kabir, say for example,
Yeah.
So you need to understand what that thought process was, and then grammar and all those things are technical craft which you build over time.
Yeah, that's a nice parallel.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on, like, actually it naturally blends into the next question. So what are your thoughts on reflecting on your work? And this is mainly because I've interviewed Dilip Prabhakar, who's like a very talented Marathi, Hindi actor, right? His response to the questions were more professional in nature. They had certain different aspects to it, different insights. Whereas if you say interview someone who's a NSD pass out or a NSD teacher, maybe they will have a different. So broadly, when you speak to an academician or a researcher, they reflect more on their work, while professionals tend to do that less, unless they are very slow in their way.
But so let's say that there is some merit to slowness. I feel that while and there is,
or then they declare it in their biography after 70 or 80, right? But very few people continuously blog what they do, which I've been trying to do in my professional life as well. But do you think so? What are your thoughts on reflecting back on your work overall?
So what is the nature, let's say, of a reflective practice? That's the larger question. I see, for us, when we started working as architects, because that work followed the publishing work. It wasn't that I was doing buildings before I started publishing. So we had a critical filter already, and that filter had become sharper over the years. Now the big problem happened is when we started doing work ourselves, because that was a free fall of sorts. So while we could comment and analyze other people's work, we realized that by holding ourselves to that standard is, especially at the beginning of practice, is going to be fairly impossible, because you don't have so you have the theoretical framework, let's say, but you have never put your hand made in the mud. You don't know what practice is like till you build. And that is also a grey area for a lot of publishing in India, because since we also are architects and we have projects and we build, we also understand the immense difficulty of that task. And the incredible logistical effort that goes on behind construction. So in some way it sobered us down a bit initially. And it was very difficult for me personally, because I could not reconcile some of the things that I was doing myself as an architect, because we had judged people with a very high standard. Now the same benchmark, if it starts applying to us from the very first day that we set up our practice, it was fairly impossible. So initially we made allowances, really, and in some way we kind of created this. But our content work enables us to get these frameworks in place quickly, to analyze our own work intelligently, critically also, and for example, the juries of the merit list or for are a great learning for us, because in that room the conversations that the members of the jury have give us this kind of this kind of sense of clarity around our own work, which is the great advantage, and also a bit of disadvantage, because I'm always scared of making common mistakes that people make early in practice. So for me, that learning curve has been a bit difficult. It's not that we have not made bad buildings. We have made enough bad buildings now so that our buildings have started becoming reasonably okay. Nonetheless, the content practice feeds into the architecture practice, and that feeds back into the content practice and now since everyone in the office, so we don't have two separate offices, and everybody imagines us to be like there'll be editors here and there'll be architects. It's not like that. It's all a mess. So everyone who works on a content project, somewhere or other, is interfaced with the architecture project and vice versa. So everybody works on everything, and that has also, not just us, that has also enabled people in the studio to grow themselves. So we question ourselves more often. We are sometimes overtly self-critical, and that is not a good thing, because you freeze in a project, if it is not kind of checking against the benchmark that you have set for other people, and suddenly it's yours, and then you are kind of looking at it as yourself. It gets more and more difficult. But what it helps is that it also helps us to pause and look back at what we have produced and articulate learnings from it. So in some way, a part of the practice becomes applied research for the other part of the practice, and therefore we are able to write our projects better now. And our process always starts with re-articulating the program, and we are also really working towards better systems to create models where we can also put our project out there for other people to criticize. A culture that we don't have in India. So the important next step for us is that before we go out then start criticizing everybody else's work, we thought that it will be important for us to put our work out there and let other people critically review it, to create a better dialogue around our practice. So so it's a bit of one thing feeds into another thing now. And now about 4 years later, I've kind of made peace with the fact that not everything that we do is going to be as good as what Samip does. So it's a bit of, so we agree that Samip is a better architect now. so
Sure.
that's where we are. But still we are doing better projects now. I'm very sure than where we started. Our buildings are much finer things than the crude things that we started with. Yeah.
In fact, I usually say this to like my juniors in my office, that the idea of putting out thoughts of your work helps in 2-3 ways, and I typically draw this parallel with Instagram, right? So on Instagram you put one photo, it could be any random photo, right? You get 10 likes, and then you automatically get that dopamine rush ki next time boss 20 likes aani hai. So you do better work, or you click a better photograph, you put a nicer filter and do that, right? So that loop I'm just channelizing into a more positive thing. This is good for like some people.
No, those tools are great,
So same way, like when you do some work, you put it out also. So there are two aspects. One is you put it out, so people comment, respond. It helps you reflect back, and you want more comments and more likes for the next work which you will do, so you put in more effort there. Plus it also happens to get document. So it's a win-win situation when you.
And there are also, as you go, there are also people who you start relating to. For me, there have been few teachers, let's say. So there is Percy Pitawala, who was my dean at the school. We are still in touch. We still share our work with him. And he can be quite brutal about it. So, which is good. Then there's Chaya.
Nilkant
Chaya. Whom we share with our work occasionally with. Bijoy Ramachandran. We are good friends, and I think what he thinks about our projects is important to me. So I kind of look forward to, and I work with Dharmesh Jadeja, the studio in Auroville. So he's also he's basically, I look at his work more as a compass of sorts, whether we are going off track of practice or we are still like sort of in. And I have also consciously sought advice and from people like Brinda, Soma and Nandini, who we meet quite often now, so I can share more difficult parts of our work with them. So there are friends who we seek critical review and advice of, but to be able to do that ourselves, like you said, is where, and we want to set up systems for that, in a way that it can feed back into our own work. That's the most rewarding part of matter in some way, to have this dual nature of practice where you're also publishing as well as authoring projects. that one thing if starts feeding positively into the another, it's a great place to be in. Yeah.
I don't know, like there's like, I think this conversation can be like infinite or whatever.
Yeah, I have all the time. I'm not
no,
doing
just to
anything.
conclude this episode,
Sure.
which also is the nature of content which is getting produced. So I believe classical work has always been like a pull, like people generally. So I hunted Sanjay Mohe's video and watched it, even it was 45 minutes. I just like during lunch or wherever I could get time, I just watched it, right? But that work, I went to it. Whereas, say, like a stand-up comedian who's obviously doing a great job of critiquing the government or whoever it is, but it has a Sida push from a lot of people, right? So what are your thoughts? Like, how long do you think it will take people to understand the value of archiving and documentation, and then that pull will eventually become push organically?
Yeah. So it's a question. So it's a nice question, because there are these two kinds of flows. There's this extremely fast pop kind of flow, which is Instagram and social media, and just put it out there and let's see, and which is the potential of which very few people have actually been able to tap positively. Bus Ride is one of them. Ayaz and guys are phenomenal. So there's a way in which they seek feedback, and that work that they put out, I think, is kind of a nudge towards seeking that feedback. It's not random. It looks like as if they are dabbling, but there's this another underlayer which I think is consistent. So you pull him up next time and ask him about this. And but there's this another one which is sort of the slow and sort of undercurrent, which is consistent, long. So there are these two kinds of bouts of, one in which you just make something and send it out, and then you have feedback, you take it back, make some quick changes, send it out. But the more foundational ideas, you need a little more time and depth for. So going back to the question, I think we are trying to do both. We know that we are good in the second part, where things are slower and longer, and we have found an audience for that. Like you said, you listened to that whole, or watched some Mohe's episode. There are these long ones on Matter, which we think, when we were in that room also, we felt like, let's get done with it now, enough. But when we came back and edited the whole thing, we realized the value of this, because in some way, these longer conversations have a better shelf life. And that's the critical part, because the Instagram post is dated in a day, while a book will stay for a long time, So while the book does it, so I'm not dismissing the importance of the Instagram post.
They are the initial atoms which where you find the final organism.
Correct.
So,
I mean, and also they are like test pieces. You send something out there, and suddenly a lot of people like it, and you think, oh, rubbish, I made it. So in some way, it is also like you can do some small dark social experiments with that kind of stuff. On the other hand, I think we are more interested in the shelf life of an idea. So as Matter, we think that an idea can only have shelf life if it is deliberated enough. And the deliberation takes time. It cannot be done in an Instagram post, And the like is not the kind of feedback that really gives you any indication of, whether what's somebody's opinion about it. So to have an intelligent conversation around work, there must be enough data on the table. Right now, we are interested in creating that data. And a lot of people, and a lot of times people tell us that, why don't you write a critical piece about architecture in India, and why can't we publish? But there is time for that. Right now, the observation itself is taking time. But I feel that just like this long podcast, hopefully will have a larger shelf life than anything which is out, which is put out there just to kind of test the public domain water. initially we were also worried about this whole thing, that design is a little muted. Our artworks are generally there's no
overall niche hai.
There is a consistent simplicity and silence around things. But now, so this year we crossed a landmark 200,000 unique visitors. 2019, we just went through the data of last year. So we feel that if we have 200,000 as an audience, which is sizable considering we are not really mainstream that way, the idea that these things will have greater shelf life is validated, to a certain extent. And we will never have 30,000
like
likes on So we'll never be that. That's not our aspiration also. But over a year, a single post keeps accumulating visitors, and we are also conscious of who are returning. How many return readers are to a particular post, and to certain posts there are too many. So we think that these things also have sort of recall,
solid value in it.
Yeah, recall. So therefore, I think it's in that sense the archive works. What it doesn't have right now is a way of a cohesive, let's say, structure. But I am not too worried about that. I think we another 5 years and that structure will sort of automatically emerge. And also we don't want to push our observations on our analysis on people. We are just right now interested in putting our observations out there. We are not judging anything. We have no judgment to this work except for the fact that if it is made to our platform, it goes through certain basic filters. If it goes to certain basic filters, you can consider it important enough for us personally and for certain audience of people to be critical about or to have a discussion around. And if that achieves, if we achieve that, I think then we are somewhere. That's the whole plan.
Yeah, actually same with me, because I tend to interview few people whom I may not resonate with. So I've put a very basic filter that in case of, say, music or arts, basically for music mainly, I would really like to have people who have more than 25 years of riyaz. Now that's a very objective, straightforward filter. Then it could be, the musician could be extreme leftist or rightist, I don't care, right? Because then the whole objective of gathering or documenting.
What is the other word for riyaz? There is riyaz and there is...
so there is ahat nada and anahat nada. So you basically work...
No, riyaz is repetitive practice.
Riyaz is practice.
Yeah.
And then
but what is
performance? Then you go out and perform.
So what is that? What is the word
Hindi
for that?
word? I don't know.
No, there is some very interesting... So anyway, so basically... no, go on. I'm just...
No, so that's the premise in when... so the idea of documentation should be without judgment, as you mentioned. It's just accumulating perspectives, right?
Yeah. And the thing is that, for I love podcasts because they are that kind of difficult medium. They are not easy to absorb, like a fast food content that we have. Podcasts and a lot of people come to me because what happens is the content is good. You should not allow dumb people to make money out of it. That's something that somebody had told me once, that don't put content out there for cheap. Put it for free, because there's a lot of value in it. But don't monetize it that way, because when you start talking to people especially when they are in consulting and and they kind of start, that you have so many visitors, let's kind of monetize it, let's put a figure to it, that I'm not interested. It's the important thing. And there are, of course, models. I'm sure it's difficult for you to sustain. It's difficult for us to sustain as well. And I'm sure in this particular kind of model that we have selected for ourselves, we have set ourselves to this difficult situation. But only this will stay. I don't think...
no, but it has to be a very conscious call because yes, Facebook is free forever for everyone. But there's a very dark side to it, right?
And the problem is that the problem is that you must protect it from people who will use it for that propaganda, So we are very conscious about that fact. We won't let anybody come close to our platforms so that they can promote themselves. This is very important to us.
Okay.
So if there are people who are interested in a genuine conversation on their work, on architecture, on larger issues that concern us, we are happy to extend this effort to them. Therefore Frame and therefore everything. But we don't want somebody to go on the Frame platform and start, promoting their ideas.
Yeah.
And I think we have found people there in some way, so we don't want to make stars out of people. That's not the whole and I'm sure that's not your agenda as well. It's this intelligent conversation that we are really interested in.
Correct,
Yeah.
Cool, I think...
thanks, Kedar.
Yeah, I mean, I would really... We can have like another Audiogyan session on some other topic, generally to understand more bits about matters,
sure,
philosophy.
Yeah.
But for this one, I think this is a good note to end this. Thanks for giving your time. It was really
No, thanks. It was very nice.
experience.
I was also a bit skeptical, but now I know.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks, Kedar.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's it.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on Audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.
Hello! It's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On This Round is on Me, Gauri is joined by Shweta Nanda. They talk about the financial independence and how it is to be a woman entrepreneur. On Anish Thing, Anish welcomes ultra-marathon runner Shivani Gharat. Shivani shares her journey of how she ran her first marathon, the mindset of a runner, and what it actually takes to run a full marathon. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Naveen, Akash and Shreyas talk about the Korean band BTS serving in the military and its repercussions. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita discuss Wing Greens and their latest acquisitions and about the Indian sexual wellness market. And on Shunya One, Sheila Datya is joined by Dinika Bhatia, CEO and founder of Nuttigrities. They talk about coming from a business family and Dinika's journey in creating healthy and guilt-free snacking. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some exciting new merch out there for you. Also, do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. And do remember to spread the word about these shows and any other shows you might be listening to. Appreciate them, rate them and review them wherever you are listening to them. You can also check out all our other shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week. Volvo XC40 Recharge, Bumble, Heads Up for Tails, Kotak Privy League Program and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thanks guys, without you this would not be possible.
Do you often find yourself surrounded by conversations about Web3, blockchain, NFTs, DAOs? What are these terms and how do they affect our future on the internet? So many questions, but don't worry, we've got answers to all your questions. Hi, I'm Eklavya Bhattacharya, and on our show Future Proofing, we try to decode the impact of these future technologies on various industries with experts and tech enthusiasts. Tune into new episodes coming out every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app and the website, or wherever you get your podcasts from.